In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this magical potion 3D artwork. Now I'm going to be rendering this with the Cycles rendering engine. However, if you want to use Eevee, you can do that. The result does look okay in Eevee as well. And if you'd like to purchase the finished tutorial project files, you can get those with the links in the video description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. Now before we start, I'm going to be using a few different resources online that you'll need to collect. So I'm going to be using my geometry nodes rope, and so that's a tutorial which I created. So if you want to pause this video and go ahead and watch that video first, the link will be in the video description, and we'll be putting that rope around the neck of the bottle. Or you can also purchase the finished project files of the geometry nodes rope, and then you can just append it into your blend file to add it to the scene. Or if you just want to use a regular curve object and just go with a more simple rope, then you can do that as well. Now I'm also going to be downloading the abandoned hopper terminal 01 HDRI from polyhaven.com, so link is in the video description, and I'll just download the 1K HDR version of that HDRI. And then also to add a little bit of surface imperfections to the glass bottle, I'm going to be downloading the fingerprint 009, and that is from Ambient CG, and I'll be downloading the 4K JPEG version. And we're going to be using the roughness map and putting that on the glass bottle. And then finally, I'm going to be using my procedural Cork material. So if you want to pause this video and go ahead and watch that video, I'll have a link in the video description, and we'll be adding it to the cork on the bottle. Or if you want to, you can also purchase the material. And also, if you're one of my customers of my ultimate procedural material pack, then you can just grab it from the ultimate material pack. Or if you don't want to use that material, you can just add a basic color or whatever texture or anything you want to add to the cork material. So here I am in a new scene in Blender, and my screencast keys will be right down here in the corner if you want to see what buttons I'm pressing. So I'm just going to start by hitting A to select everything, and we'll just delete everything. So let's now model the bottle. So I'm going to go to the add menu, and to model the bottle, we're going to go to mesh, and I'm going to add the UV sphere. And then I want to scale this better to the real life scale in Blender, and the default primitive objects are a little bit larger than an average human in the real life scale in Blender. So I'm just going to scale this object down, and I'll type 0.1, and then I'll hit Control A and then just apply the scale. So that bottle is still a little bit large, but it's much closer to the real life scale in Blender. So let's hit tab to go into edit mode, and what I'm going to do is zoom in here, and I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop there, not the very center one, but just the next one out. And I want to scale it up a little bit because it's a little bit small for the bottleneck. So I'm going to scale it, and I'll type 1.2, so 1.2 and hit enter, so it's just a little bit bigger. And then I can just select the center vertex and hit X, and we'll delete it, so we'll delete the vertices. Then if we hold down the Alt key and select that loop again, we can hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'll just bring it down a little bit on the Z-axis, and then we can just extrude it up on the Z-axis. And I'm going to extrude it up so it's about half a grid tall, so you can see there's these grids in Blender, so 1, 2, so just bring it up so it's about half a grid tall. So then I'm going to hit E to extrude and bring it up on the Z-axis, just bring it up a little bit, and then extrude the entire thing up a bit again. Then we're going to extrude the entire thing up on the Z-axis like that. And then we're going to extrude the entire thing on the Z-axis and then scale everything down a little bit. And then also if it's not quite big enough, you can hold down the Alt key, select that loop, hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that loop, and you can scale the entire thing up a bit and then maybe scale it down the Z-axis, just like that. So we have kind of that lip there at the top of the bottle. Let's save our project. So I'll click on File and Save As. And I'll just save this as a magical potion in a folder with my project files, and I'll just save the file. So then just hit Control S as you're working on the project to save it. So let's hit tab to go back to object mode, and I want to kind of round it out and then also give it some thickness so the glass actually is thick. So let's go over here to the modifiers, and I'm going to click on add modifier and type in solidify, and we'll add the solidify modifier. So now you can see if I change the thickness value, we're actually giving the glass thickness. So I'll just turn it down just a little bit, so something like that. You can kind of go in here, kind of see how thick it is. So I don't want it to be too thick, but also not too thin. So maybe like a 0.006, I think that's pretty good. And then what I also want to do is hit Control 2. So Control 2 is going to add the subdivision surface modifier, and I'll just leave the viewport and render levels to do, and then we'll just shade the object smooth. And then also right here, you can see it's really smooth. So I'm going to go back in edit mode, and I'll hit Control R to add a loop cut, and I'll click here and then drag it up, and then click there, and then hit Control R for another loop cut, click here, and then drag it down. We can also do the same thing here, so Control R, click, and we'll drag up, place it there, Control R, and then click there, and then drag it down. So now the curves of the bottle are a bit sharper. And I think if I go into edit mode and just go into wireframe, we'll deselect everything. We can just hit B for the box select and box select the entire top here. I think I just want to bring everything down. So hit G and Z, bring it down on the Z axis so it's a little bit smaller. So now let's model the cork. So I'm going to hit Shift C to make sure the 3D cursor is in the very center. And I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to add a cylinder. And I'll hit tab to go to edit mode. And I'll just scale everything down in edit mode. So we're going to make it really small. And then I'll go back into object mode. And in object mode, we're going to bring it up there. And then hit tab to go back into edit mode and we'll scale it way down. So then what I can do is hit the 3 on the top of my keyboard or click here to go to the face select, and I'll select the top face and scale it up a little bit. And then if we go inside here, let's select the bottom face and scale it in a bit. So if we go into wireframe, you can see we're basically tapering in the cork. So let's scale it down in edit mode and we're just going to stick it there inside the bottle, just popping out a little bit. And that's pretty good. So then what I want to do is add some more geometry because we're going to add a subdivision surface to smooth it out. So let's select the face select and select the top face. And I'll hit the I key to inset the face and then I again just to inset the face there. And then what I can do is hit the / on the numpad. That's going to go into local view so I can just see the cork. And I'll select the bottom one and I'll hit I to inset and I to inset. And then what I can do is add some geometry here. So I'll hit Control R to add a loop cut, and I'll scroll my mouse wheel until the loops are about a square. So you can see those faces there should be about a square, and I'll left click and right click so they stay where they are. So now I can hit / to go out of local view. We'll go back to object mode and I'm just going to shade the object smooth. So now I want to add more geometry. So I'm going to hit Control 2 to add a subdivision surface with 2 levels. And what I'm going to do is turn the viewport and render both up to 3 so it's pretty detailed. So now what I want to do is just make the object slightly lumpy and bumpy to make it look like a cork. So I'll click on add modifier and I'm going to search for the displace modifier. So you can see it's bulging out and it's really big. That is because the object is really small, but we want to add a texture to this. So let's click on new to add a new texture. And then just for now, I could turn the strength way down to like maybe a 0.01. If I zoom in here, that was a bit too small. So maybe turn it down to like a 0.1. It's still overlapping, but we're going to kind of fix that later once we add a texture. So to choose the texture, we're going to click on this button here, which will go to the texturing tab. And then here on image or movie, we want to change it to clouds. So now you can see it's looking a little bit kind of noisy, but it's way too big. So I need to turn the size down. So you can kind of see when I turn it down, now it looks more jagged. So I'm going to turn the size to a 0.02 there on the noise or the clouds. And then we'll click back here to go to the modifiers and I need to turn the strength down. So I believe like a 0.002 is going to be pretty good. So I'll use a value of 0.002. So now if I just hit 5 on the numpad to go to orthographic view, I can zoom in and you can see it just looks a little bit lumpy on the edges. So there it is before and after. And you could turn the subdivision down. I could actually just turn it down to like 2. Because it doesn't need that much detail. So now we can make the liquid. So what I'm going to do is select the bottle and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate it and then hit escape so it stays where it is. And if I hit F2, we can rename this and I can just rename this to liquid just so we're not confused between the liquid and the bottle. You can see if I open up the outliner and look here, you can see here's the objects. If you want to, you could rename all the objects. So this other sphere, I could call this bottle. And then this object here, the cylinder, I could call this cork. If you want to kind of organize it, you can. So let's now select the liquid object. And what we want to do is apply the solidify because I don't want it to be solid. So I want to apply it and just use the part which is inside the mesh. So I'm going to click on the drop down and apply the solidify. So now if we hit tab to go into edit mode, if I kind of zoom in here, I need to hit 5 on the numpad to go to out of orthographic view. You can see we have like the inside of the bottle. So if I go to the face select, we have the inside of the bottle and then we also have the outside of the bottle. Now I want to delete the outside. So what I'm going to do is go to the face select and I'll hit B for the box select and just drag here on the very bottom to select those faces. What I'm now going to do is hit the plus key on the numpad. Actually, I need to hit Control plus, so hit Control plus, and that is going to just maximize the area and select the faces which are all around it. So just hit Control plus, just like that. So we're going to select all of those faces. We're now going to hit X to delete, and we're going to delete the faces. So now if I hit tab to go back to object mode, let's hit / to go to local view, you can see we just have the inside of the bottle. So this was the part which had the solidify. So I'm going to go back into edit mode and I'll hit 1 to go to front view. Let's go to the vertex select and I'll hold down the Z button and go to wireframe. And you can see here is half of the bottle. What I want to do is hit B for the box select and also select this top here. So we're going to keep half of it and then one more loop, but all the rest of it, we're going to hit X and we're going to delete the vertices. Let's go back to solid view. So you can see that is going to be the liquid. So let's hold down the Alt key and select that loop right there. And I want to inset it and extrude it in. So we're going to hit E to extrude and then hit S to scale and then click there and hit E to extrude and S to scale, click there, E and then S, click. And we're just going to continue to do that until the liquid's pretty small. And then we're just going to hit the F key to fill the face there. And so we have more geometry there. So we'll be able to use that to kind of make it bumping up and down, kind of to make the liquid look like it's splashing around. So let's also sharpen up this edge here. So I'll hit Control R and I will click here and drag over and then just click right there. Then I'll hit Control R to add another loop cut and we'll click here and drag up and then click right there. So you can see we've added the loops there, so now it looks really sharp. Now we also need to recalculate the normals because the shading looks a bit off. So if I select everything, we will hit Shift N to recalculate the normals. And there we go, that looks a lot better. Now before we go out of local view, there's one more thing that I want to do to this object. And that is, if I go back into edit mode, I want to make it kind of move up and down to make it look like the water's kind of splashing. So let's click on this button here to turn on proportional editing. You can also hit the O key for proportional editing. And then I just want to select a vertex here and hit G to grab and hit Z and bring it up on the Z axis. But I need to scroll my mouse wheel way down to make the size smaller. So we'll drag that up there, maybe select this and drag it down. Select this, maybe bring it up, bring this down, maybe like bring this up here, just so the water is going to look like it's kind of splashing around. So let's now hit / to go out of local view. So I now want to make the bottle rotated around, but I don't want the liquid to move around because I want to just rotate the bottle, but have the liquid kind of be affected by gravity. So the liquid is still going to be straight, even if the bottle is rotated over. So what I'm going to do is select the cork and then shift select the bottle, and I'll hit Control P and we'll set parent to object, and we're going to use the keep transform. So this way, if I select the glass, I can rotate the bottle and you can see the cork is going to move with it. So if I hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view, I can rotate this over like this. Then I can hit 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and I can rotate it over kind of like that. So you can see the camera is going to be kind of from this view. You can also double tap R, which will use the trackball rotation, and just rotate it kind of down like that. So let's now add a camera. So I'll go to the add menu and we'll go to camera. Just click here to add a camera. And then I'm just going to move my view to about here, and I'll hit Control Alt Numpad 0. So Control Alt Numpad 0 is going to bring the camera to my view. And let's click here on the object data properties. And I want to turn the focal length up. So I'm going to turn the focal length up to 70 just to kind of zoom the camera in a bit. And then also let's click here on the render properties, actually the output properties. And I want to change the resolution so it is a square image. So I'm going to change the resolution to 1920 by 1920, just like that, so it's square. Then with the camera still selected, I can hit G to grab, and then I'll hold down the shift key to make my movements more sensitive, drag it right there. And then if I hit G and then tap the Z key twice, that'll bring the camera forward and backwards. So I'll just bring the camera right there. And then I can go into the rendered view and I will hit Control B to add a camera boundary. So Control B, drag a box around the camera. And this way it'll only render what's inside the camera view. And then of course I am going to be using the Cycles rendering engine, but the result does look okay in Eevee as well, so you could use Eevee if you want to. So we need to add some lighting, so let's click over here to go to the world properties, and we want to click here on the yellow dot next to color, and I'm going to choose environment texture, and then we'll click on the open button to open up an HDRI. And I'm going to be adding the abandoned hopper terminal 01. I'm going to be downloading the 1K HDR version from Polyhaven, so link is in the video description if you want to download it. So let's just open the image. And then I don't want to be able to see it in the background, but I still want it to light the scene. So if we go to the render properties, let's scroll down, and on the film tab, we're going to check mark the transparent button. And then also let's go here to the color management, and I'm going to use the view transform of Filmic, but to make the colors kind of pop out more and be more saturated, I'm going to change the look to very high contrast. Let's save the project again. So now let's make the glass material. So I'm going to select the glass, and let's click here to go to the shading workspace, and I'll click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this glass. Now I'm going to call this glass outside. So call it glass outside because we're going to have two different materials, one glass for the inside and one glass for the outside. Basically, we're going to add the surface imperfections, which look like the fingerprints, but I don't want the fingerprints to be inside the glass, just outside the glass. So we'll be having two different materials. So let's go into the rendered viewport mode. And what I'm going to do is select the principal shader and delete it. Now, so that there aren't so much fireflies and there isn't so much noise with the glass, I'm going to be creating a custom glass shader instead of just using the default glass shader. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the glossy BSDF. So let's plug the BSDF into the surface. So the glossy is basically just like a metallic material, but then what I'm going to do is mix it with the transparent. So search for the transparent shader and drop it here. And then to mix them both together, I'm going to be enabling the node wrangler. So if you don't have the node wrangler enabled, you can click on edit and go to the preferences. And then here on the add-ons tab, you can go to the search and just search for node and just enable the node wrangler add-on. And I'll show you how to use it in the video. So I'll close the user preferences. So if you select two shaders, you can hit Control-0, and that's using the node wrangler. And it's going to add a mix shader and mix them both together. So you can see this is transparent and then this is the glossy. So we just want to mix them together, and I'm just going to change the factor to a 0.3 so it is more transparent. And then also let's take the glossy roughness and we'll turn that down to 0. So you can see it's starting to look a bit like glass. So now I want to add the surface imperfections. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for image texture and we'll drop this here and then we'll open a texture. So I'm going to be downloading this fingerprint 009 from Ambient CG. Link is in the video description, and I'm downloading the JPEG 4K version. And so once you download it, you'll extract the zip file and then you're just going to grab the roughness map. So we'll open the roughness map. Now because this is a roughness map, we want the color space here to be set to non-color. And then with the fingerprint selected, I'm going to hit Control-T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes, and we'll be using that later. So let's take the fingerprints and we'll put that into the glossy roughness. So now the fingerprints texture is going to affect how rough and shiny it is. So where the fingerprints are, it's going to be more rough. Now you can kind of see if I Control-Shift and select the fingerprints here, you can see this is what the fingerprints are looking like right now. So the placement is really messed up. And so what I'm going to do is plug the object into the vector, and then what I'm going to do is take the flat here and we're going to change this to a box, and then I can turn up this blend value to like a 0.4. So this is a cool texturing setup which doesn't use any UVs, so you can see it's just going to kind of evenly place the texture around. So you can see the fingerprints are way too big because like there's a giant finger, so let's turn the scale down. So what I can do is just search for like a value node. I will put the value node here and I'll just plug the value into the scale, and that way we have a really easy value that we can control. And I'm going to hold down the shift key to make my movements more sensitive. So now we can change the size of the fingerprints. And I think turning the value to 6 is pretty good. So now you can see there's the size of the fingerprints. That might even be slightly big. So you could also just turn it down to maybe like a 5. 5 might be a little bit better. So now let's Control-Shift select the mix shader again to preview it. Now it's kind of hard to see what is happening. So I want to make the fingerprints a little bit more contrasted. So to do this, we're going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for a color ramp. So just search for ramp and then add the converter color ramp. We'll put it between the fingerprints and the glossy. So just stick it right there. And now what I can do is drag the black tab over and drag the white tab over. And you can see when they're closer together, it's going to be more contrasted. So if I preview the color ramp, you can see now it's very clear where it's black and where it's the fingerprints. So where the fingerprints are, that's going to be more rough. So I'm just going to drag this over here. I don't want it to be too strong. And then the white tab, I'll maybe drag back over here. So we can go into the camera view and you can kind of see those fingerprints. Now those fingerprints are a little bit strong, but since this is sort of like a stylized render, I actually want the fingerprints to be a little bit stronger than they would be in the real world. So I'm going to go with something like that. Now one problem with this is it's a little bit hard to see inside the glass. So what I'm going to do is make the glass more visible when you're looking straight at it. So right here in the center. So to do this, we are going to search for the layer weight. Let's add the layer weight. And if I Control-Shift and select the layer weight and select it 2 times, you can see there is a facing value, and the facing value is going to make the faces which are pointed towards you black, but then the faces which are pointing away from you is going to be white. So it's going to be black in the center. So we're going to use this as a mask to make the center be transparent. So what I'm going to do is drag this back here and we'll duplicate the mix shader and drop it here. And then we'll plug the mix shader into this one here, so the bottom one. And then we can take the same transparent and we can put that into this one. If you want to, you can duplicate the transparent, but it's just going to be the same thing. So I'll plug the same one here into the shader. And now I can Control-Shift select the mix shader, and you can see I have a factor to blend between using the first mix shader or using the transparent. So what I can do is put the facing into the factor, and so that way you can see in the center it is more transparent, but then on the edges it's more of the glass. Now on the blend here, I find that like a 0.2 is pretty good, but you can change the blend value to kind of change that. So if I just preview that, the blend value is making it more black or more white. So I think turning it to a 0.2 is pretty good. And you can now see in the very center of the glass, it's more invisible. But then here on the edges, you can still see the surface imperfections. So now what I want to do is use basically the same exact material, but I want to just delete the fingerprints from the inside. Now it's a little bit hard to see in this render, but if I like zoom in here to the edges, you might be able to see it. But basically what's happening is there's going to be two different layers. So for example, if I zoom in right here, you can see there's the first layer, but then because we have a solidify, there's a second layer. So you can see it looks like the fingerprints are kind of doubling each other. You can kind of see it over there. There's like that one there and then that one there. So it's kind of doubling. And that's because we have two layers of the glass. But I want the inside to not have the fingerprints. So if we select the glass, what we want to do is go here to the modifiers, and I want to click on the solidify, click on the drop down and apply it. So if I go into edit mode and go in there, you can see it's all geometry now. So now what I want to do is go to the very bottom of the glass, and I'll go to edit mode, and I'm going to go to the face select, and I'm going to box select those faces, and I'll hit Control plus, so Control plus, and we're going to select all of the outside of the glass. So continue to hit Control plus until all of the outside of the glass is selected. So just like that. Now what I want to do is hit Control I, and Control I is going to invert the selection. So in wireframe, you can see everything inside is selected. So now if we go to the materials, let's go here to the materials properties. We're going to click on the plus here to create a new material. And on the drop down, we're going to add the glass outside. So we now have the same material, but they're both in the material slots. So they're on the object. But now I want to duplicate this material. So we're going to click on this button right here, which looks like the little like paper icon. So we're going to duplicate it. And so this one we're going to rename to glass inside. So we have the outside and the inside. So now we can just click on the assign button, and that's going to assign the selected faces to the glass inside. So now let's go into the rendered view, and let's just zoom back in here. So now you can click on the glass inside, and we can select all of these. So the color ramp and the texture coordinate mapping and the fingerprints, and we'll hit X to delete it. And so this way the inside of the glass won't have any of the fingerprints, but just the outside will. So let's hit Alt H to unhide everything. So now let's make the liquid material. So I'm going to select the liquid. Let's click on new, and I can just rename this to liquid. So for this, I'm going to turn the roughness down to 0.4, so it's a bit more shiny. And then I'm going to search for a gradient texture. So we'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for gradient, and we're going to drop this here. And with the gradient selected, I'll hit Control T, and that'll add the texture coordinate mapping. And I'm going to use the object coordinates. So let's put the gradient into the base color. And so you can see right now it looks all black. And so the gradient is basically going to have white on one side and black on the other side, but right now it's all black, so we need to adjust the mapping. So you can see if I like change the location, now you can see there's the gradient moving. So what I'm going to do is rotate the gradient. So we want to rotate it on the Y by 90 degrees. And then what we want to do is take the X and we want to drag it. You can see if I drag it down, now you can see there's a gradient. So if I Control Shift select the gradient here to preview it, you can see it's going to be darker here and then lighter up here. Now it is a little bit subtle, so let's drag these back here. And I'm going to go to the add menu and search for ramp, and we're going to add color ramp. And what we're going to do is put the color ramp in between the gradient and the principled, and then we can just preview the principled shader. So now you can see if I drag the color ramp tabs and make it really contrasted, you can now clearly see the gradient. So you can see it starts black down here, but then it gets white. So you can see that's why we rotated it, because it was rotated sideways. So we can rotate it on the Y, so it's pointed up and down. And then we can also change that location on the X to bring it up and down. So I'm going to turn this to like a 0.08 on the X location. And then I can drag the black tab and drag the white tab. And I'm going to drag the black tab to about here, and then the white tab to about there. So the black is going to be on the bottom. So if I click on the black, I can change the color. And of course, you can be creative with this and use whatever color you want. I'm going to make this kind of like a purpley color. And then here on the white tab, this is going to be a nice bright red color. And I would recommend just playing around with the colors and finding your own unique color. But if you do want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, you can use the same hex codes. So on the purple here, you can punch in this hex code into that value. And then here on the red one, you can punch in that hex code into that one. So those are the colors I'll be using. So now to make this really look more like liquid, we can open up the transmission, and I can turn the transmission all the way up to 1. So if you turn it up to 1, you can see now it definitely looks more like liquid. You can turn the roughness down to make it even more look like liquid, but I actually like keeping the roughness up. I just think that looks a little bit nicer. So now what I want to do is mix it with the transparent. So we're going to search for the mix shader and drop the mix shader here after the principled. And then we can also search for the transparent shader. So add this here, and we can put the transparent into the bottom one, and then the normal principled shader, we'll go into the top one. And I just realized I added the wrong shader, so instead of translucent, let's go to the add menu, and we want to search for transparent. So we'll put the transparent into the bottom one, and then the principled shader into the top one. So now I can drag the factor around. So 1, it's going to be using the transparent, and 0, it's going to be using the principled. So I'm going to turn it to like a 0.3, just so it's a little bit more transparent. So that is it for the liquid material, but I want the top of the liquid to have kind of a noisy surface. So let's select the liquid, and we'll hit tab to go into edit mode. Let's go into solid view, and then I want to hit / again to go into local view so we can just see that object. And what I want to do is select all the top faces. So what I'm going to do is just click here to select that center face, and then I'll hit Control+ again, so Control+, and we're going to select all the other faces just like that. So we just have the top faces selected. And let's hit Control+ one more time so we also select that little one there. So that other small loop of faces. So what I'm going to do is add the same material, but then we're just going to make the top material have a bit of noise. So it looks like it's a little bit more kind of splashing around. So let's click on the plus here to add a new material. And on the drop down, we're going to choose the liquid. Don't forget to hit Control S to save your project. And then what we want to do is click on this button here to duplicate the material. And then this one I can call liquid surface. So now we want to click on the assign button, so it just assigns that liquid surface to the top faces. So let's go into the rendered view and let's zoom over here. I'm going to actually move over to the back so I can kind of see the reflections. And now what we're going to do is search for a noise texture. And we're going to drop the noise texture here, like where the gradient is. Let's use the object coordinates. So we'll put the object into the vector. And then we'll take the noise texture factor and we're going to put that into the normal. But then to convert it to bump data, we want to search for the bump node, and we'll drop the bump in between the noise and the principled, so just like drop it there. And then the noise factor, that can go into the height value of the bump. Now it's really hard to see the noise, so what we can do is turn the scale down to see it better, but it's still pretty hard to see. So I'm going to turn the distance value to a 0.02 instead, so that way it's going to be a bit stronger. And then I can change the noise settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to like a 60, and then I'll turn the detail to like an 8. So now you can see it just looks a bit noisy on the top. So if we go into the camera view, it is a little bit hard to see. Once we add lights though, you'll be able to see it better. So let's hit / to go out of local view, and I can hit 0 to go back into the camera view. So now just the top of it has that noise, whereas the rest of the liquid is nice and smooth. Now there's one more thing that I want to do to make the liquid a bit darker and more rich, and that is that we're going to go to the modifiers. I'll click on add modifier, and I'm going to add a solidify modifier. And then let's go into the solid view. Actually, I'll go into the wireframe view and kind of zoom into the end. So you can see there's the solidify. So I can drag the solidify thickness, and I'm going to make it a really small number. So like a 0.001, maybe even like 0.0005, and that way it's going to be very small. But now if I go into the rendered view, you can see the liquid is more dark and more rich, whereas before it's kind of looked like it's almost glowing. You could do that if you want to, but I think it just looks too bright. So the solidify is just going to make it nice and dark. So now what we're going to be doing is creating some bubbles. So we're just going to add one bubble object, and then we'll put them inside the glass. So I'll go to the add menu, let's go to mesh, and I'm going to add a UV sphere, and we'll just shade the UV sphere smooth, and we're just going to scale it way down and make it much smaller, and then bring it over here to the side, and I'll scale it down a bit smaller, so just about the size that I want for the bubbles, so about that big, and then I'll bring it over here just so the camera can't see it. And hit Control A and apply the scale, so that's the object's new default scale. So here in the materials, let's add a new material, and I can just zoom into the object, we'll go into the rendered view, and I can just rename this bubbles. So for this material, we are going to search for the glass, and we're going to delete the principled shader and put the glass into the surface. So the basic material is going to be glass. But then what I want to do is make the edges kind of glowing to give it a cool stylized effect. So we're going to search for an emission and drop the emission under the glass. Now on the emission strength, I'm going to turn this up to like a 30. And then the color, I'm going to make this kind of a pinkish color. And of course you can use whatever color you want. If you want to punch in the same color that I'm using, you can use this same hex value right there. So now I'm going to select both of these materials, and I'll hit Control 0. Again, that's using the Node Wrangler add-on, so it's going to add the mix shader. And so now it's mixing between using the glass or the emission, but what I want to do is just have the emission on the outside, so kind of around as an outline. So to do this, we're going to search for a layer weight, and we're going to use the layer weight as a mask in the factor so that just the emission is on the corners. So if I Control Shift select the layer weight twice, you can see we have the facing, so there's white around here and then black in here. So what I'm going to do is put the facing into the factor, and let's just preview the mix shader. So you can see in the middle it's more glass, but what I want to do is make it more contrasted liquid. So we're going to search for ramp and add the color ramp and drop it here between the layer weight and the mix shader. And then I can drag the black tab out a bit and then drag the white tab. Actually, I think I'm going to leave the white tab where it is because I do want kind of that blending there. But then the black tab I'll move over to about there. So now if I kind of zoom out, you can just see there's like a bubble with glass in the middle and then it's glowing on the outside. So now what I'm going to do is select the bubble and press F2 to rename it. And I'm going to rename it to bubble, just so it's named so we can use it in the geometry nodes. So now what I'm going to do is click over here to go to Blender's geometry node workspace. And I'll hit 0 to go into the camera view, and I'll go into the rendered view, and I'm going to just click here to select the liquid. So now on the liquid, we're going to click on new to add new geometry nodes. And so if I close the modifiers, you can see now it's added the geometry nodes as a modifier. And I can rename this to bubbles if you want to. So rename the geometry nodes to bubbles. So what I want to do is create random points, and then those random points are going to be inside the mesh and around the mesh, and then we're going to place the bubbles wherever those points are. Now normally what you could do is you could search for like the distribute points on faces and drop this here, and I could turn up the density, but the problem with these points is that they're not inside the mesh. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. So what I'm going to do instead is use the distribute points in volume. So we need to first turn this into a volume, and then if we use the distribute points in volume, the random points there are going to be inside the mesh as well as around the mesh. So what I'm going to do is search for volume, and we're going to add the mesh to volume and drop this here. Now in the density, I'm going to turn this to like a 2000. So now you can see it looks kind of like a cloud. So now what I can do is search for distribute, but instead of distributing the points on the faces, which would be around the outside of the mesh, we're going to distribute points in volume. So add that node and drop it right there. So now if I turn up the density, you can see it is a little bit hard to see because the points are so big, but if I like went into edit mode and scale it way up, you can see it would actually be inside the mesh as well as being around the mesh. So it's going to be inside the mesh. So that way those points are inside the mesh, and we can now just add the bubbles to where all those points are. Now in the density, I'm going to turn this to like an 80. And then what I want to do is instance the object on those different points. So we're going to search for instance, and we're going to do instance on points and drop the instance on points after the distribute points in volume. So drop it there. So now what we can do is we can plug up the object, the bubble object, to the instance. So to do that, we need to search for the object info node to give it the object that we want. So drop the object info right here. And if we click here, you can see I renamed the object. So here we go. There's the bubble object, and the geometry can go into the instance. So now you can see that wherever those points were, there's now bubbles instead of those big blobs of points. So it's actually going to be the bubbles instead. So if I go into the rendered viewport mode, you can see this is going to look really cool. So we have all these cool glowing bubbles. Now I do want to add the original liquid back into the setup. So what I need to do is go to the add menu and search for join geometry. We want to add this to the very end of the setup, and we want the geometry, the original geometry, to go into the join geometry. And that way we now have the bubbles, which are these nodes here, adding the bubbles, but then we have the original geometry. So now it looks like there's bubbles inside the liquid. So that's looking really cool. I'm going to hit Alt H to unhide the objects. Actually, I need to hit / to go out of local view to unhide the other object so we can see them all. So I think the bubbles are quite a bit too big. So what I can do is search for random value. So just search for random, and we can add the random value node, and I'm going to put the value into the scale of the instance on points. And this way, bubbles are randomly going to be bigger and smaller depending on these two values. So the minimum is 0, so some of the bubbles will be so small you can't actually see them, and then we have the maximum scale value. So I'm going to turn the minimum value up a bit to like a 0.1 so all the bubbles are visible, but then this one here, the maximum, maybe I'll turn that down to like a 0.6 or something like that. You'll just have to fiddle around with it. I think maybe turning it up a little bit bigger is better. So the maximum size is going to be the largest bubbles, and the minimum size are going to be those really small bubbles. So maybe a 0.1 to a 0.7 is pretty good. Now also what you can do is you can play around with the density to control how many bubbles you want. So you can have just a few bubbles or lots of bubbles. You could turn this way up if you want tons of bubbles. And then there's also the seed. So you can play around with the random seed to just kind of randomize it. So I like that one, maybe a seed of 4. It's probably going to look different for your one, but just play around with the random seed and that will randomly place the bubbles around. So finally, what I want to do to finish off the bubbles is I want to make a few bubbles floating on the surface. So I'm going to go back here to the layout and I'll go back to solid view. And I'm going to select the glass and hit H to hide it. So I can just select this object here, the original bubble, and I can actually just move it over here, and I'll just actually stick it right here. So just bring it up and stick it right there. And then what I can do is press Alt D, and Alt D is going to duplicate the object, but it will keep the same object's data. So that way it'll render faster and the Blender file won't use as much memory. So Alt D to duplicate, just hit Alt D and that'll duplicate it, and then I can scale some up and scale some down. So Alt D, and then an easier way to kind of move these around on the surface is to use the snapping feature. So if I click on this button here, which is the little like magnet, that's going to turn on snapping. And then if we click on the snapping settings, I'm going to click on face project so it snaps to the face. And now if I hit G to grab, you can see if I move this around, it's snapping to the top face. So I'll hit Alt D and then Alt D and Alt D and just do that a few different times. And then you can just kind of scale these. And some of them I want to move them down on the Z axis. So I'm going to turn off the snapping and then move them down the Z axis and just make them so they're slightly underneath. So they're slightly underneath the water. So move that one down. Move that one down. So hit 0 to go to the camera view and go into the rendered mode and just see how that's looking. So you might want to like move the bubbles around if you don't like how they are. Maybe make these ones a bit smaller. So I can hit Alt H to unhide the objects again. And there we go. We now have some really cool glowing bubbles. So I now want to add some more lights to make the scene look a lot better. So I'll go to the add menu and let's go down here to light. And I'm going to add the area light. So let's kind of zoom out here and I'm going to move the area light over. Let's hit 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and I'll rotate the area light, maybe scale it down, and just have one light right back here. So move it underneath the light or behind the light. So if I go into the camera view, you can see we're getting that cool rim light. So there's these nice bright reflections on the back of the glass. Now, if I click here to go to the light settings with the light selected, I want to take the shape and I want to turn it to rectangle, and then I can turn up the X size and the Y size, and I want to make it a long, thin light. And then I can also turn the power down, so maybe I'll just turn the power to like a 4 on there, on the power there, so it's not quite as bright. And then I can hit Shift D to duplicate, and let's rotate this light and move it down here. And I want to have like another light on this side, so we're basically going to have 3 rim lights. So we're going to have a top rim light, and then a rim light over here, and then if I duplicate this again and rotate it on the Z axis, we're going to have a third one over on this side. So this way we're getting these really nice kind of rim lights there, and it's kind of adding highlights around the glass, and it really makes the glass pop out, and that looks really nice. It's also going to add a bit of a glow, because in the compositor we're going to add a glow or a glare, and so it'll kind of make the glass glowing on the edges. And you can also change the X size and the Y size to kind of adjust that, get to how you like, to make like a long thin light for a rim light. And then finally I'm going to select this light here, and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll rotate over, and I'm going to have one light kind of on the front but slightly over to this side, and it's going to point directly at the light. And on the shape here, instead of rectangle, I'm going to change it to square, so it's a nice big square light. Let's go into the rendered view to see how this is looking, and I want to maybe make it a bit brighter, so let's turn it up to like an 8, so it's a bit brighter, and you can see we get that nice kind of highlight there. So you can see that highlight there, that square, is from that light we just added. And it's just adding a bit more light overall to the scene. You can make it a bit brighter if you want to see things better. Maybe I'll turn it up to like a 10, so it's a little bit brighter. So now what I want to do is add the Cork material. So I'm going to select the Cork object here. Now, if you're one of my customers of my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, then if you've set up the material pack as an asset library in Blender, you can just open up your asset browser in any of your projects. So I can click over here to go to the Assets tab, and then here's my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack with lots of materials. I have almost 300 materials, and I'm adding more and more materials in every new update. So what I can do is go to the search here, and I can search for cork, and we have these 2 corks. I'm going to add the agglomerated cork, and I'm just going to drag and drop this here. So drop it on the object, and then if I go into the rendered view, there we go, we have a nice cork on that cork bottle. So now I can like change the scale of this. I can also like change the distortion. I actually really like how the default settings are. I don't really want to change the scale or anything, but you can definitely do that. You can also change like the color of the cork. So that's how to add it in if you have my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack. Now, if you purchase the procedural material, or if you did the tutorial and you have the material in like another Blender file, you can append it in by clicking on File and then click on Append. Then you can locate to the Blender file where you have the cork, and you can go inside the blend file, and then you can go to Material, and then you can click on the cork and then click on Append. Then once you append in the material, you'll just need to click on the material dropdown and add in the cork. So if you purchase the finished tutorial project files, then you'll also get this cork material, or you can purchase the material on my Gumroad or Patreon, or you can also just watch the tutorial and learn how to create it yourself. Or if you don't want to do any of this, you can just add like a basic like brown material. Really, whatever you want to do is up to you. I'm just going to go back here to the layout. Now what I'm also going to be doing is adding in my geometry nodes rope. So again, you can purchase that geometry node setup on my Gumroad store and Patreon page if you like to, and then you can append in the object into Blender and add it to the scene. That's what I'm going to be doing. Or if you want to go ahead and watch the tutorial, you can watch it for free on my YouTube channel with the link in the description. So I'm just going to be appending in the files. So I'll click on File and I will click on Append. And then I'm going to go into this Blender file with my customizable rope. Again, if you purchase the project files of this tutorial, then you'll get this blend file. So I need to go into the blend file, so double click on it. And then I'm going to go to the object category. And then I want to click on the rope and click on Append. So now it's going to be added into this file. And let's go back into the solid view. So I will just select the object and go into edit mode. And I'm going to hit the L key to select that entire piece and hit L to select that entire piece. And I'll hit X and we're going to delete the vertices. Then I can just click and drag to box select these here and hit X and delete the vertices. So we just have a smaller amount. So I'll hit the A key to select all of the handles and I'll move it over here. And then I can also turn up proportional editing because that's still on. And what I can also do is hit Alt S. So Alt S will change the size of it so the rope is more thin. Now, if you don't want to do the tutorial or you don't want to buy the customizable rope, that's totally fine. What you can do is hit Shift A for the add menu. And you can go here to curve and then just add the Bezier curve. So here's a default curve. Then what you can do is you can open up the geometry and you can go to the bevel and you can turn up the bevel depth just like that. And then also click on the fill caps button so that the caps are filled. So now you can see this is a really quick way to make rope. However, it doesn't look quite as detailed as my geometry nodes rope. But if you just want a quick rope and you don't really care about making it super detailed, then you can just do that and follow along with the tutorial just using a more simple rope. But I'm going to be using this rope here. Now, I also don't really want the threads. I just think it looks more stylized if it like doesn't have threads. So what I'm going to do is click here to go to the modifiers, and this rope comes with customizable settings. So what I can do is just take the thread amount and turn it to 0. So now there aren't any threads. So I'm just going to bring it down here, scale it down a bit. And then I'll hit tab to go into edit mode and I'll scale it down, and I can double tap the R key for the trackball rotation. And I think I need to scale it down a little bit more. So just scale that down, and then back in edit mode, I can move it over here, and we're just going to start to place this around the object. So I'm going to first start by just kind of scaling down the handles and moving the handles around, and we're going to have it go around in a circle. I also think the rope could be twisting around a little bit more, so that on the rope twist, I'm going to turn that twist down a little bit so that it's twisting more. All right, so I'm going to scale this handle down and then select this handle, kind of scale that down to right there. And then if you get to the end of a handle, you can hit E to extrude and then R to rotate and G to grab. And we're just going to put the rope right down there. So I'm going to have this rope kind of go over this one, so they're overlapping. And then I'm going to extrude again and have it kind of go underneath this rope. So this rope, I should bring it out a little bit. And I should bring this rope out a little bit, scale that down. So you can see the rope is going all the way around. And then the second rope, or the other side of the rope, is going to go underneath it. So it's going to kind of twist around. It is a little bit fiddly, but you just kind of have to move around your view and just move around the different handles to get that right. So let's extrude this and rotate it. And so this second rope, or the other side of the rope, is going to be just underneath the first one. I also find that hitting 5 on the numpad to go to orthographic view can kind of help, because you can zoom in closer. So let's bring this up here, and then we will extrude. Oh, that's the wrong one. I want to select this one and extrude that one out, kind of rotate it over. So I'm going to have the rope go around twice, but let's see. This one here is overlapping, so I need to move this one out a little bit so it's not overlapping. So then let's extrude this out, and we'll extrude it down and extrude it down, kind of like that. So now for this one here, this rope, I'm going to have it kind of rotate a few times. This rope here, let's extrude it out and we'll rotate it. We're just going to have it go around in a few like circles. So let's bring it up here and then extrude it down again so it goes around. So we're basically tying like a very simple knot. It's not really even a knot. It's just the rope is going to go around in a few circles to kind of hold it in place. So let's extrude this out again, scale the handles down because the handles are a bit too big for this kind of curve, and then extrude out again and rotate it and extrude out again, and I'm just gonna have it rotate like 3 times, so like that. And then at the very end here, once it comes out here the 3rd time, we're just gonna have this kind of go down like this and just kind of hanging down. So we can scale the handle up so it's a bit more smooth. And then we'll just kind of have it rotate over like this. So basically the rope goes up, then it rotates around 3 times, then it goes all the way around twice, and then it goes down here. So that's what I'm going to do. So now I'm just going to kind of go in here and just fiddle around with it, because it does just take a little bit of fiddling around to get it right. You kind of just have to zoom in closely and just kind of take a look at it and make sure there isn't too much overlap. And then as for these little pieces, the stringy pieces or the end pieces, I'm just going to rotate them so they're kind of resting on the glass and kind of curving a little bit, just like that. So kind of bring this down so it's resting on the glass, and bring this down so it's resting on the glass like that. All right, let's go into the rendered view, see how that's looking. So that's pretty good. However, right here, it kind of goes way over to the side a bit, and I don't like that. So I'm just gonna select this one here. I'm gonna go into orthographic view so I can zoom in really close, and I'm gonna move that handle over. So we are now ready to render the scene and then do the compositing. So let's go here to the render properties, and I'm gonna open up the sampling, and I'm gonna render this with 400 samples just so that there isn't really that much noise, because sometimes with this glass, there's a bit of fireflies, which are like those little speckles, or there can be a lot of noise. And then I'm also going to use the denoise here to denoise the image. And if you want to use Eevee, if the render's taking way too long, you could also use Eevee if your computer renders better with Eevee. And then what I'm also going to do is open up the light paths to make the render faster. So if I turn off the caustics and turn down the filter glossy and turn down the indirect and direct light, and then also here on the max bounces, basically what we can do is we can turn down the max bounces. And if there's less bounces, then Blender won't have to calculate as many of the light paths, so it'll render faster. But if I turn the light paths way too far down, the shading's going to look a bit weird and things might look dark. So I'm going to turn the total diffuse glossy all to 3, and then I believe the transmission, I kind of need it up a bit because there's so many different layers of transmission. So there's like the glass and there's the liquid, and all of those have transparency. So if I just turn it down too far, you can see now it starts to get really dark. So I'm going to keep this up maybe to like a 7. That's probably the minimum amount I need. But then all of these other settings can be turned down. We don't need any clamping. We don't need any caustic. So I'll just turn all those down. So just hit Control S to save the project. And then I will hit F12 or click on render and render the image. All right, so the render's finished. So let's click over here to go to compositing. So click on use nodes. And then I'm going to search for the glare, and we'll drop this here. And on the streaks, I want to change it to the bloom instead, and then I'll hit the V key to zoom out the backdrop. You can use Alt V and V to zoom it in and out. So I'll add the glare, and on the glare tint, I'm going to make it this nice blue color. You can play around with the color or use the same color that I'm using. I'm also going to turn the strength to 2, and then I'll turn the size down to a 0.4. And then also let's turn the quality to high, so it looks a bit higher quality. Now the glare isn't very strong, so I'm just going to hit Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. So there's 2 glares, and that way they're a bit stronger. And you will be able to see the glares better. But right now, because it has a transparent background, you can't see the glares too well. So now what I'm going to do is add a backdrop. So I'm going to search for the ellipse mask. So type EL, we can add ellipse mask, and I'm going to use this to create a basic gradient in the background. So when you add the ellipse mask, if you click on it, you can change the values manually, but there's actually these little values here, which you can like click and drag. So you can use the X to move it around, and then you can use the little squares here to kind of make it bigger and smaller. So I'm going to make the ellipse just slightly smaller than the glass. So just like that. So if I Control Shift select the ellipse mask, you can see it's going to be white and black. So now what I want to do is blur it to make a nice background. So I'm going to search for the blur, and I'll drop the blur here. And I'm going to turn the size X and Y to 400. Also, if you are noticing that my compositor is working really quickly, that's because I use the GPU in the compositor. So if you hit the N key to open up the side panel, you can go to options here, and if you do have a GPU in your computer, you can change the performance here to GPU, and I find that makes the compositor way faster because it uses your GPU instead of your CPU. Now what I want to do is I want to add some custom colors, so you can search for the color ramp, and I'll drop it here after the blur, and then I want to make like some different purpley colors. So I'm going to make this color here kind of like a dark purple, and then this other color, I'm going to make this kind of like a lightish pink. And if you are wanting to use the exact same colors I'm using, the dark purple is going to be this hex value here, so you can punch that in. And then for the light purple or the pink, you can punch in this hex value if you want to. So now what I want to do is just put the background behind the image. So to do this, we're going to search for the alpha over node. And let's just drop the alpha over right here. And I can take the color ramp color and I'm going to put that into the top one. And then the glare can go into the bottom one. And let's just Control Shift select the reroute here. And you can see there is the finished render. And so if I select the glares and press the M key, that's going to mute them and unmute them. So you can see what the glares are doing. So just adding a nice glare to the image. What you could also do is duplicate the glare one more time to make it even a little bit brighter. You could also make the lights a bit brighter in the scene. So if the lights are brighter, the glare is going to be brighter. Another thing you could try doing is you could change like the bloom to like the streaks instead, and then maybe turn up the streaks here. And you can see it's going to add kind of that little shine there. So that's pretty nice. I might do that. The streaks are pretty strong though. So I might like turn down the strength a little bit. So now to save this image, I'm going to press F11, and F11 is going to take us to the render result, but we can click here and we can change this to the viewer node. So now to save the image, we'll just click on image and we're going to just choose save as. And I'll just save this as magical potion. You can save it as a PNG or a JPEG image. And then I'm just going to click on save as image. So that's going to wrap it up for this tutorial on how to create this magical potion. So I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching. And if you're interested in purchasing the tutorial project files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. So links are in the video description. And thank you everyone so much for your support. And if you do enjoy creating these kind of magical stylized renders, then a product you might be interested in checking out is Celeste Tools, which is a really cool Blender product which uses geometry nodes to create some really cool stylized effects. And I actually created an add-on review video where I show how to use the product, so if you're interested in checking that out, link is in the description. And I also have some affiliate links to the product, so if you purchase the product through my affiliate link, then I'll earn a small commission. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.